From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
From our fellow conspiracy realist, Evan. Evan writes to us and says, "Hello, I'm wondering if you have done an episode on the burning of the Library of Alexandria. It's a fascinating topic," says Evan, "and has been said to send civilization hundreds of years back." Set civilization hundreds of years back. It's a common misbelief that it was all of a sudden burned, as I believe it was actually becoming very unpopular over centuries and then it was accidentally burned. Would society be at a different place today if it had still been kept intact? Are there any rumors of important documents that would have changed society today? Why didn't they just save all the physical copies as PDF files? That's a weird one, Evan. So Evan says, all joking aside, I believe there are many avenues to explore with this topic, and if it has not already been an episode, it would make for a great show. I agree. I think that's a fantastic point because the Library of Alexandria is one of those big historical what ifs. You know, we're all vaguely aware of it. We've heard of this. We know that human society in general has a bad habit with when it comes to book burning, or in this case, scroll burning. But I don't think a lot of us know I think in the modern day, like a lot of us are not aware of how the decline of the Great Library actually worked. You know what I mean? Like picturing the Library of Alexandria, it kind of reminds me of the exploration we did on Aram, the city of pillars, right? Which was a mythological city, but we found the real thing. And it turns out that, maybe it just looked more impressive back then because the people who finally happened upon it were often starving to death and had, lost members of their caravan along the way. So maybe the library, if we saw it in the modern day, maybe it wouldn't have been as impressive as it was to people of the time. But it is an interesting question. I don't know. What do you all think? So do you think it would have changed history?
I don't know. I guess it's hard to know. Do we have a sense of what we're missing? Or is it just like, it's just poof, gone? We don't even have any indication of what might have been in there.
Well, okay, we know a couple things about Alexandria of the time and what the library really was. Right. The first thing you need to know is that, gosh, I mean, it was, tell me if I'm wrong on this, Ben. My understanding is that it was Alexander the Great that founded this, founded Alexandria, at least. And that was way back in the day, 331 BC, I believe, BCE. And then from there, it became this big, essentially a harbor town, like a trade, a big part of the trade routes, sure, Alexandria itself in Egypt. And one of the big things that they did in Alexandria was create papyrus specifically for writing purposes. And, you can imagine if you're at the hub or if you are the creator of most of the paper or something, you would be also interested in keeping around the things that are put onto paper, generally words, which become books. Sometimes pictures, or both, which is the best kind. Pictures and words.
Oh, agreed, my friend. Agreed. But I mean, would like a modern day equivalent of this be something like the Library of Congress? Like it's meant to, house all of these really crucial cultural documents of import that would be, a legacy type thing? Or was it just a really awesome library that just had like fantastically curated materials?
I can field some of these. So the library itself had a an agglomeration of a ton of different things. But to me, one of the most fascinating parts of this is that the experts right now, if you ask them, if you put them to the sword and said, tell me how many scrolls, or how many things, documents were in the library, then their best guess is somewhere between 40,000 to 400,000. And the reason that's roughly,
Wow.
you'll see people say that's roughly the equivalent to 100,000 books. For reference, the Library of Congress has more than 39 million books that are cataloged. The problem is, we know the founding of the Library of Congress. We have a factual history of how that institution came to be. But if we look at something as ancient as the Library of Alexandria, uh, it's like finding the origins of dynasties in ancient China. You know, we get into the world of legend very quickly. We know it wasn't the first library of its kind, but there are mythical elements to the origin story.
Absolutely. And just before we jump into some of those, the big fact in my mind, in answer to your question, Noel, is that think about, we can't even imagine it. Think about the time of 284 BCE. Just the number of writings, of knowledge, of recorded histories, of sciences that were being developed, really anything. It's not like you could just go somewhere and grab a book, right? You couldn't order one online. You couldn't go to a bookstore down the road because people don't just have giant stores of books and papyrus scrolls anywhere where you can pick up and learn what you want to learn. Libraries like the one in Alexandria and in the few other places across the world at the time, that was it, man. That's like that is the knowledge base essentially, right? And if you're going to make copies or something, you needed to have the source material, and you can only go to a couple places to get it.
Yeah, they had a huge operation for this. The government funded purchase of books or purchase of scrolls and documents, and they sent out government agents with scads of cash to try to find any and every text that they could get their hands on, because they were nothing if not ambitious. They wanted this to be the number one repository of all human knowledge. And that's why they were trying to archive things as well as collecting them. They wanted the oldest possible stuff. So if they had like 5 leads on different translations of something, they would want all 5, but they would definitely go for the oldest first. So in answer to that question, that means that we can surmise there were religious texts, because remember, religion and science are very, fingers on the same hand here this time. They would also want biographies. They would want things that appear to be descriptions of the natural world, myths, poetry was really big. That's back when people cared about poetry still. And because of this, they would also host specialists. You would go get a job at the library, which is no small feat, because we also have to remember that literacy was considered a weapon in many parts of the world at this time. There are people who were not allowed to be literate because it was seen as a threat to the status quo. There is a rumor that they may have even started keeping live animals there, like exotic animals, as a repository of knowledge.
Yeah. I'd never heard that. That's amazing.
So like you go, I love the idea of you going to the wing of the building where you're looking through alphabetized things. Let's just call it G. And you're like, okay, geography, and there's a giraffe. Okay. I like the idea of the giraffe being between the books.
And geometry over here. So yeah, there's a big giraffe in between. Just hanging out on the bookshelf, or between the bookshelves.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful.
But to the question about how how was this destroyed? You are right, Evan. It appears that it went through a period of decline before it met its death knell. We know that it was accidentally burned by Julius Caesar around 48 BCE, but we don't know how much of it was completely destroyed, how much could have been salvaged or rebuilt shortly after in a recovery phase. We know that it dwindled. Public support and funding were being pulled around 260 CE, or yeah, the mid 260 CE. Membership at the library stopped being an option. And then over the course of rebellions, counterattacks, domestic unrest, sometime between 270 and 270 CE, experts believe whatever remained of the library was destroyed. But it wasn't like some equivalent of a terrorist came to an existing successful institution and then burned it to the ground. It just kind of ended with a whimper instead of a bang.
Well, okay, so that's really interesting. I had read elsewhere, I mean, it's not the best source. It was medium.com, but and I couldn't find the sourcing for it. But the impression of this writer was that exactly what you're saying is correct about the first time it accidentally burned in that time frame. But then this author is saying that with the decline of Egypt under Roman rule, which is what you're talking about, that's what kind of caused it to have that downturn in funding and support and all of that stuff. But then Alexandria revolted against Roman control, I guess, and there was that battle, or the battles that ensued after that, is what caused it to burn. I wasn't sure if you guys found anything about that.
Yeah. Again, it's a little tricky because we're examining the story of something that has a partially legendary origin tale. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then we have to consider the great game of telephone, all the intervening agendas of people who are reporting on this over the millennia. We also have to say, we also have to point out that it's a weird question because it turns out that a lot of the information at the library, not everything, but a lot of the information there existed in other places. Like a minority of stuff was actually lost for good forever.
That's kind of what it seemed like would be the case. That was sort of what I was getting at early on, was like, surely there were backups, or, you know, I mean, it would, even if it's hand copied, I mean, you think they would have made more than one if these things were really, you know, culturally significant.
Well, you know, one of the main things, I think Ben mentioned this, but one of the main things they would do at the library is make copies of books and things that were coming in. And
it makes me think of the Game of Thrones, where the Citadel, you know, where the where the maesters all hang out, and the library is this amazing. I bet you it was even modeled after something like that. And there's a lot of those scribes, or the library, you know, maesters are copying manuscripts by hand.
Yeah. And speaking of backups, there was a second library that was essentially an overflow library. I'm gonna pronounce it incorrectly. Serapeum, Serapeum maybe. And it did a lot of things, but one of the major things it did was take care of the overflow from the Library of Alexandria, because there was so much just going into that place. And I'm assuming, we don't know for sure, but I assume that there was quite a bit of backing up of documentation. That one did survive another like 120 years after the Library of Alexandria burned, at least allegedly.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I love that you're pointing this out. Don't think of the Library of Alexandria as just a supersized version of your local library. Think of it more as a research institute. This is a place where people are translating work continually, and it's very rare for that to happen with such systemic and successful design. The thing is, there are other libraries too that we would talk about. Maybe we should just talk about the loss of ancient libraries, because the Library of Baghdad was sacked. There's the House of Wisdom that people might not be as aware of. It is an enormous loss to history, but it's a very difficult question for us to answer when we say, what would the world have been like? I mean, revisionist or alternative history aside, to answer that question, we would need to have a little bit better idea of what was in there that was lost to time, you know?
It's the old chicken or the egg question. Or something.
The papyrus or the page. Yeah.
There, boom, Ben.
Something
Way
like
to
that.
date it. Way to make it era appropriate. This is. I mean, I started to harp on this, but it does feel like there is a parallel with the National Archives and the Library of Congress, and just the idea that like this is a repository of all the stuff that we think is important enough to keep and tag and put a number on. But I'm sure there's digitization efforts involved now, just in case, there were an attack or, God forbid, a waste paper basket fire that, poof, took the whole thing up. They probably do have those PDFs that the listener was talking about.
Ooh, I hope they have a secret room in Iron Mountain. I'm sure they have like real rooms in Iron Mountain that are public knowledge, but how fun would a secret room be?
A secret room in a secret mountain. This is the B site, the Iron Mountain, that nobody knows about.